Okay, done with the watch through of Orange's video. Now it's off to bed so I can get a fresh start in the morning.
I'm like Webster's Captain of Awesome over here.
Evolution is true, because science.
Does anyone else suspect that when they said evolution is science, they meant it is Scientology?
Science. Evolution is true, science.
Imagine you have 8 popsicle sticks and a bottle of glue. You have the instructions for making a picture frame. What I want you to build is the Starship Enterprise, not a model of it, the real thing.
It's true, science. Whee!
It's like a magic trick! It's like a magic trick!
It's like a magic trick!
Oh my god, that was horrible. Oh, whew, just a dream. Hey, where am I? What's with this boring white background? Where did all my psychedelic swirlies go? This plainness is giving me a headache.
Welcome to the stick domain, Rhino. I've transported you here while you slept because I think we need to have a little chat.
Transported? Like Star Trek's transporter? Or like you're being a creep sneaking into my room, drugging me, and then dragging my ass back here?
Silence! From now on, I will be asking the questions. First, why are you in my territory?
Because you kidnapped me.
No, I mean, why are you doing response videos to a channel I responded to first?
Oh, well, because I'm too damn lazy to find my own.
Ha! We finally have the truth. I demand that you step aside so that I can show you how it's done.
I would be laying down aside if you hadn't brought me here.
Oh, shut up. On to part 5.
Just remember the stuff presented by this creepy bear is from the Evolution 101 website, written by the Understanding Evolution team. Commentary by Rentafriend2000, that's me!
You know, I've made at least 2 videos on you before Vice Rhino came along, and yet you decided to respond to his video instead of mine. So I had to come and get your attention by appearing on Rhino's channel. Don't worry, I'm sure Rhino will be responding to your video soonish? I don't actually know, but for now I'll just be here to tackle another video you made.
Homologies and analogies. Since a phylogenetic tree is a hypothesis about evolutionary relationships, we want to use characters that are reliable indicators of common ancestry to build that tree. We use homologous characters in different organisms that are similar because they were inherited from a common ancestor that also had that character.
If you'll take out your Debate for Dummies book and look up circular reasoning, you'll find homologous characters. How do we know that these 2 creatures are descended from a common ancestor? They have homologous features. How do we know these are homologous features and not just coincidentally similar? Because they descended from a common ancestor with that trait? But how do we know they descended from that ancestor? Because they have homologous traits. How do we know those traits are homologous?
That's not actually how it works. Do you think something like that would be accepted in the scientific field, where other scientists scrutinize your works to the minute detail? Circular reasoning isn't accepted here. In science, if you want to have an idea be accepted by the community, you have to be able to demonstrate your claim to be true using evidence and reasoning. Now, in this case, we're not using homologous structures as the single evidence to evolution. You see, evolution is a big daddy topic that encompasses and is composed of many ideas. There are so many corners and angles to it, so naturally it is supported by many other subfields of science. But on the topic of homologous structures, let's go through a specific example. This is a common example employed in science textbooks. This can be seen in birds, rabbits, lizards, and bats. Despite their forelimbs being used for different purposes depending on the species, they are structurally the same, with the presence of 3 specific bones, the radius, ulna, and humerus. These similarities in structures, minus the subtle differences, suggest that they have evolved to suit each of the species better in their environment, but also come from a common ancestor. However, it's not like this is the one and only example we have that shows that organisms share the same ancestor. More so, I view this as a supplement to the DNA and fossil evidence that have already been used to map out the tree of evolution.
Later they will bring up what they call Convergent Evolution, meaning 2 creatures evolve a similar trait when their most recent common ancestor did not have that trait.
Actually, that's a faulty simplification. You're making it sound as if the traits would have to come from species that are closely related in order for the particular trait to be identified as convergent evolution, when in reality, convergent evolution describes a trait from 2 different species that are not closely related, but evolved phenotypical structures that are similar and serve similar functions due to the environmental pressures. This is different from homologous structures in the fact that homologous structures start off the same from the ancestors, and changed a bit due to selective pressures for organisms that have speciated, while convergent evolution starts off different but evolved to be similar.
So how do they know the homologous features from the convergences? They check the phylogenetic trees. Yes, the trees they are going to try to confirm with this data is the foundation on which the data is built. Is the room spinning yet?
Well, actually yes, the room is spinning because whoever animated you keeps spinning it. Scientists don't check the phylogenetic trees as a way to determine if divergent or convergent evolution has occurred, or if structures are homologous or analogous, but rather these two can serve to reinforce each other. What scientists do is that they can properly analyze the two structures and determine if they are homologous structures or if convergent evolution has occurred. Let's take another example that is commonly used in science textbooks: the wings of the bird and the wings of an insect. They both are wings and they both serve the same function of flight, but they structurally are different. While the bird has feathers that are attached to the forelimbs, insects utilize a flapping membrane to propel itself. This example can even be extended to bats, where bats would have a membrane that is structurally maintained by fingers. Bats, however, is kind of a weird example since their forelimb, like I mentioned earlier, is an example of homology compared to birds, but the wings and the function of flight evolved separately. Thus is also convergent evolution. The point is, you can tell whether or not the structures are homologous or analogous from simple analysis. We don't determine that just by looking at a phylogenetic tree.
Again, imagine a lawyer pulling this one. We found shoe prints which were made at the time of the crime. We know these are the defendant's shoe prints at the scene of the crime, which proves he is guilty.
No, we're not doing this. If I wanted to cringe, I would go watch The Vigilant Christian. God, that guy has mental issues, man.
An example of homologous characters is the forelimbs of tetrapods. Birds, bats, mice, and crocodiles all have forelimbs. Sharks and bony fish do not. The ancestor of tetrapods evolved forelimbs, and its descendants have inherited that feature, so the presence of forelimbs is a homology.
This is sure to confuse some creationists, but then again, Berkeley didn't write this to argue with religious nutjobs. They wrote this to educate high schoolers.
Translation. If you presume evolution to be true, and you presume the ancestor of all four-legged animals was itself a four-legged animal, then you can assume that four limbs is a homology. Yet even after all of the required assumptions, these homologies will be delivered as proof of the evolution, which has to be presumed to decide these are homologies. Are you dizzy yet? We're just getting started!
Motherfucker.
Not all characters are homologies. For example, birds and bats both have wings, while mice and crocodiles do not. Does that mean that birds and bats are more closely related to one another than to mice and crocodiles? No. When we examine bird wings and bat wings closely, we see that there are some major differences. Bat wings consist of flaps of skin stretched between the bones of the fingers and arm. Bird wings consist of feathers extending all along the arm. These structural dissimilarities suggest that bird wings and bat wings were not inherited from a common ancestor with wings.
Not only did flight supposedly evolve in separate ways unrelated to a common ancestor, but the very similar radar that bats and dolphins have supposedly evolved separately and were not from a common ancestor.
See, homologous structures would only have had to evolve once in history. You get that trait once, and then when that species diverged to multiple other species, they keep the traits left from the ancestor. Convergent evolution, meanwhile, would involve this trait evolving more than once. Two species who are distantly related would have had to independently acquire this property in order to best suit the environment they lived in, and usually they will end up very different in structure compared to one another. Evolution doesn't have a set path. It's not written down in a fucking magical book or something and organisms evolve accordingly. No, many mechanisms of evolution are luck dependent, like mutations for example. It is natural selection that selects out the traits that work, and here's the key word: that work. Even if it is not the most optimal it could possibly be, as long as it works, it will be selected for by natural selection. Since the introduction of these traits can essentially be random, such as by mutation, multiple possibilities could occur. If we took two different organisms and used the same environmental pressure to force them to evolve a similar trait, they will likely do it differently. In this specific example, bat wings and bird wings evolved to have the same function of flight, but are not structurally similar, and that's what we expect from convergent evolution.
How do we know the radars are not homologous? We check the phylogenetic trees, but how do we build those trees? By linking species with similar traits. Chicken, egg, chicken, egg, chicken, egg!
This goes on for some time.
Even more problematic is the necessity to have amazingly improbable events, such as the accidental increase in genetic information to cause the development of sight or flight from an unguided accidental process happen not just once in the history of life, but multiple times.
So now we're back to a very common argument presented by theists, that evolution and the acquirement of new traits is somehow luck. Like I mentioned earlier, there is a luck factor involved from a few mechanisms of evolution. However, you can imagine natural selection as the force that makes this process non-random in terms of its function. A mutation generates a trait that is detrimental to the organism? No problem, that organism will die and won't pass on its genes. But if we had a mutation that is beneficial under the environmental pressures, you bet it'll be selected to be passed down to offsprings. So So let's say an environment change that will encourage species to acquire a certain trait, such as flight. Multiple species will do it, even if they don't do it exactly the same way. Now, in reality, environmental pressures aren't going to be that specific, such as only allowing airborne animals to thrive. There are usually multiple ways to adapt, and if flight, for example, is one of those solutions, multiple species can achieve it.
This idea is illustrated by the phylogeny below, which is based on a large number of other characters. Bird and bat wings are analogous, that is, they have separate evolutionary origins, but are superficially similar because they have both experienced natural selection that shaped them to play a key role in flight. Analogies are the result of convergent evolution.
So if they had a common ancestor with that trait, it's garden variety evolution. If they don't, it's convergent evolution. As you will come to see, they've created a veritable 31 flavors of evolution, so that no matter what happens, or doesn't happen, they can label it evolution.
I don't think you have an educated grasp on what these terms actually mean. We don't just label things however we want just to fit some narrative of evolution. These are actual terms that accurately describe the patterns in which species change. Both divergent and convergent evolution are pathways that organisms can follow. Anyway, that's all the time I have now. Thank you to Rhino for having me on. It's certainly been a huge pleasure to me. Next time I won't teleport you to my domain without your permission. Sorry about that. Bye.
Huge thanks to Professor Stick for tackling that one so I could have a bit of a break and keep my tenuous hold on sanity for a little bit longer. If you haven't already subscribed to Professor Stick, I highly recommend checking his channel out. Remember to follow me on Twitter and support me on Patreon. See you next time.